Hi, this is Huw for Tone Twins TV, and this is the second of our videos on restoring a vintage Fender neck. In this one I'm going to be showing you how to refret a vintage Fender by putting the frets in sideways, which is the way Fender did it originally. I'm also going to be showing you how to bevel the fret ends, level and crown, and also how to soften the fret ends, make it really nice and comfortable to play, and to recondition the board. I should stress that this is really a technique that can only be used on vintage Fenders and probably only on Fenders that are being refretted for the first time. If it's previously been refretted and the frets have just been yanked out, there's not a lot of point in doing this. But if you want a really authentic refret for a neck that is otherwise original, this is absolutely ideal. I'm placing this length of fret wire into the vise because all these frets have to be prepared before they can be tapped sideways through the slots. I always use a small needle file to prepare the frets, and what I'm doing is sharpening the one end of the tang, and also I'm creating a little bit of a ramp on the underside of the crown on each side of the tang so that it can go in the slots smoothly. If you don't do this, the rough metal at the edges can just plough through the rosewood and tear it up as the frets are going in. This doesn't actually take that long, and it's no more effort really than preparing the fret ends for a bound fingerboard refret. Finished off all 21. I've actually installed one of the frets already, which is why it's missing at the end here. This is just a nice big heavy block of oak, and I just drilled all the holes, number them, and then the frets are all cut to length. And it keeps everything organised, and the prepared ends are all upright, so I know which way to insert the frets when I'm tapping them in from the side. I'm going to show you how I do that now. This is a very cheap fret pressing core. It's basically a G-clamp, and it comes with two attachments. This is flat for doing the heel end, and then there's a curved section here. And it just slots on the end like this. This basically comes with some inserts, and you can buy extras, but I've got this 7¼ radius, 7¼ inch radius brass caul inserted here, which basically I'm going to be using not to press the frets in, but to actually guide the frets as I'm tapping them in from the side. With fret jobs like this, I do like to glue the frets in, and to do so I use this stuff, which is fish glue. It behaves in a very similar way to hide glue, and it sets crystal hard. The advantage of it is that you don't actually have to heat it up first, and it's reversible with heat. But the best thing about it is that, contrary to expectations, it doesn't actually smell of fish. Okay, I'm just going to wipe that off now, the excess. Okay, I need to take away the strips as well. This is another little bit that comes in really useful. I took a curved section of fret, just a little bit, prepped the end as I did with all the other frets, and this will just slide in on the treble side. Here's the fret I prepared for fret slot 20, and I've just got to get my jig in position now. Right, so the caul isn't tightened that much. It's just basically pressed down to touch the fret at this end and the little fret shard at the other end. And so what I'm going to do now is just tap this in gently. that one in, and I'm just going to use my little fret snips now. I chop these as I'm going along, partly because I'm less likely to cut my fingers by accident on all the sharp fret ends. But also, I find that if I don't cut these end frets, which are close together, it's very difficult to get the nippers in at an upright angle, so sometimes you end up with the tangs kind of looking a little bit wonky in the sockets because they've been forced across. Okay, so having done that now, I'm just going to wipe off any excess glue. So let's just do one more, just to show you how this procedure works. Okay, 3 frets in. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this up to about 12. There's a lot of open time on this hide glue, so I'm going to take it up to about the first 12 frets, and then I'm going to get a radius block over here. I'm just going to clamp them all down while the glue sets. So I've got the first lot of frets in up to fret 12, and I'm using a 7¼ inch radius block. I've just clamped it down very carefully. There's a bit of cork protecting the neck from this nasty looking clamp here, so don't worry about that. Yeah, basically I'm just going to hold these frets down in place with the block while the glue goes off, which will take I'll leave it a few hours actually, maybe overnight, and then I'll just come back and do the rest of the fretboard. The last of the frets have been put in, and this is sat overnight under this metal clamping core. It's a radius block really, but I'm using it as a clamping core. It's a 7¼ inch radius block for leveling fretboards. It's also great for gluing in frets. As you can see, all the frets are in. They're seated really well. I've gone along with a little testing tap like that along all of them, and they're ringing true and clean. So I'm happy with the fret installation. So the time has come now to start tidying up the fret ends. They've just been flush snipped using the nippers, but all the ends are very rough and very sharp. So if you do this kind of work, you know, be careful about grabbing the necks. It's so easy to cut yourself doing this. The first thing I'm going to do before I start doing any filing is just protect some of the vulnerable areas. So what I like to do is wrap just some kitchen paper around the top of the headstock here. I'm applying masking tape, but I'm applying it over the paper, not allowing it to touch any of the paint. This is just in case the file just kind of overshoots and ends up contacting the headstock. I don't want that to happen, so that provides a layer of protection. What I find with this finding angled file for doing these fret bevels is that it creates a lot of metal dust, and the metal dust can get quite embedded in this rosewood, which is quite open grained actually. So to avoid that happening and giving this fretboard a metallic look, what I like to do is just run some masking tape across the top. The other thing is, as the frets are being filed, what you get is the metal dust actually scratching the top of the frets. And often with fret installations like this, especially if they've gone into a fairly flat fretboard, you don't really need to end up doing a lot of fret leveling. Sometimes you don't need to do any, if you've really prepped the board and made it extremely flat. If the dust gets on the frets and you're kind of rubbing it like that with the file or the bottom of this file block, you end up having to do a lot more work on the tops of the frets than you might otherwise have to do. So by protecting the board like this, it gives the filing block something easy and smooth to run along, and it also protects the fretboard. I've got a couple of blocks. This one takes the bevel far further towards the center of the board, and I find that is often problematic with vintage Fenders because the boards are quite narrow and you end up with strings that slip off the edges, especially if you want to keep the original nut. So it's just a steeper angle on this one, which I prefer for vintage Fenders, and I just have to round over the ends of the frets really nicely. Perhaps not quite as comfortable, but it stops your E string slipping off, so I think that's playability is more important in that sense. Anyway, long process begins. Well, I've done this side and it's feeling really smooth. You see some scratch marks on the ends of the bevels, but those will polish out quite easily. Anyway, it's really smooth under the fingers, and I've got a really nice even bevel going along. Both sides of the board are now being beveled. The frets are smooth with the wood. Obviously the ends are still quite sharp because I haven't done the rollovers yet. I'll do that probably next. So I just got to take off this protective tape. See very carefully where I've done the inlays. Okay, a little bit of metal dust to brush off. But the tops of the frets are absolutely immaculate. So what I'll do is I'll pop the original nut back in, which will no doubt be, the slots will be too low, but that's okay. I can put a capo across the first fret and I can basically figure out what's going on with the rest of the frets. I'll just put a little bit of tension on the neck as well, but actually very little. I'm not going to try and crank it back. So it turns out that the neck is an absolutely great fit for my 1963 Strat body, which I guess you'd kind of expect. Although some leveling is required, I can already tell that nothing drastic is going to be required to get this neck playing very nicely indeed. What I've done is I've marked all the problem areas with black. It's not too many of them actually. They're relatively minor. And then I've just gone over the the rest of the fret with purple, because what I'm going to do is just run a leveling beam across this now. Basically try and level these up as quickly as possible, and it really shouldn't take an awful lot, because this guitar is actually playing pretty well before I've even leveled the frets. When I'm doing this, I'm using a full length beam so that all the frets are always under the abrasive paper. If you use short beams, then you'll often have the frets exposed at the ends, and the frets in the center of the board end up getting like a double hit, and you can end up with choking out at the top of the board. So I try and do all the frets simultaneously. I've completely covered the fingerboard and the sides of the neck with this low tack masking tape. Low tack's really important when you've got kind of crumbly rosewood fingerboards and delicate lacquer, which can easily kind of flake or peel off along with the tape. So this is just a safety precaution, really. And what I'm doing, I've leveled the frets, they're all level, and I'm just going to basically go across the top of each fret again, just as I did before I did the fret leveling, with this Sharpie. Just run this along the top, so when I crown the frets over, I can shoot for an extremely fine black line running across the top of the fret, and that'll let me know that I've rounded off the edges really nicely. It's brought it to a nice crown, and it's a nice handy visual guide. You don't have to do this, but I find it helpful. Okay, this is a fret crowning file. You do not have to use a dedicated fret crowning file. They can be quite expensive. This is a diamond one. Because I'm doing this all the time, I just invested in it. It makes things quicker and easier, and a lot less tedious. But you can do it with triangular files, flat files, rounding them over. You don't need specialist tools to do this, but specialist tools, as usual, do tend to help. So basically, just one fret at a time. Look very closely at what I'm doing, and we're off. Okay, that's all of those done. There are scratch marks on the frets now, which is fine. That was a really quick procedure there, because they didn't need that much leveling in the first place. So I've got to go over these now with increasingly soft abrasive paper. So I'll probably start off with 400 grits, and then 800, 1000, 1500, whatever. Finish off with micro mesh, and maybe even get some wire wool in there at some point. And yeah, bring these up to a really smooth surface, really good shine, and hopefully this will be playing really well. And I've also got to still round over the corners of these frets, but I'll do that right at the last minute when I've taken this tape off, because I want to get the corner of the file right down low so there's no sharp bits at the bottom of the bevels. Well, I finished polishing up the frets. I went through various grades of abrasive paper and used this 3200 grit stuff that I get from car accessories shop, and I kind of went in at the end with some quadruple O wire wool. I didn't use wire wool on guitars for years and years and years, and I've recently come back to it, and it's a nightmare around anything magnetic, and you know, I'll probably just chuck this protective cloth straight in the wash after this. But it makes light work of taking scratches out, brings things up to a really nice polish, and it'll be really good for getting the little bits of glue squeeze out off the board, which is the next task that I have to do on this one. As I said, this is super low tack masking tape, which I would suggest is a lot better than the regular kind of high tack stuff if you're going to do this kind of work with delicate vintage finishes. I managed to reuse the original nut, just had to pack 3 of the slots with some bone dust and super glue. Got to finesse those a little bit, but they're going to be absolutely fine. Just come down onto the side now, and all I've got to do is round over the edges of these bevels, and this neck is ready to go back to its owner. So I just finessed those 3 nut slots while the nut was still on the guitar. So this kind of dark, very hard residue on the underside of this this nut, which is undoubtedly the original. So makes me wonder if maybe Fender put it in with hide glue. Not sure. Anyway, I'm going to pop this one in with a couple of little dabs of fish glue. And that should hold it really nicely, and also you should be able to release it quite easily should the need arise at some point in the future. This side is completely flat and smooth, and this side is a cutting edge. So when I use this file, I want to use the non-cutting edge, the smooth flat edge, so I can get right down against the board without actually damaging the board. Okay, so the way I do this is I get into the corner of the fret there, just rounding them over from both sides. Okay, and that's pretty much it. So they can get a little bit sharp right down there in the corner. So that's where I want to make sure there's no sharp edge. And I'm actually just using pretty much the weight of the file, which is next to nothing, because I don't want to remove massive amounts of metal. I just want them to feel smooth. So I'm just going to work my way around along both edges of the boards. You've seen how it's done. So I'll just cut back in as I'm finishing this. Okay, so that's all the fret ends done, and I'm just going to basically do exactly the same thing on the sides of the frets that I did on the top. I'm not going to mask it off or anything. It's going to be grades of abrasive paper, and then micro mesh, 3200 grits and 4000 grits, and just get these polished up. Okay, I'm going to start this with some 800 grit. This is 1000 grit. This 3200 grit abrasive pad from Halfords, and now we're going to do 4000 grit with a micro mesh. Okay, the fret end's really smooth, really shiny, and I just got to do the other side. Almost there. This board is extremely dry, so the last thing I'm going to do now is just oil the board. I'm going to use this F1 oil for this one. It's a little bit more protective, I think, and it just seems to bring out the colours of the board really nicely. Often use lemon oil, sometimes use this. I think they're pretty much interchangeable, but it's going to give this a good soaking, and if necessary I'll give it quite a few applications, because if it all soaks in, this board is so dry, it probably wasn't oiled in decades, and the rosewood is actually quite flaky. Let's get it oiled up and hopefully give it a new lease of life. The fret job and board restoration are complete, and I've already tested the neck on my guitar and I'm really pleased with the way it's playing. The owner contacted me after watching the Chris Buck Strat Restoration videos and asked me to do the same for his neck. It was nowhere near as bad as Chris's, but it still required a fair bit of work, as you can see. The guiding principle for me behind this sort of job is to end up with a neck that looks like it has never been restored and never been refretted, but plays just as good as it would have done when it was new. Hopefully I've managed to get pretty close. Hope you enjoyed watching the process of restoring this vintage Strat neck. It's playing great now. I think it's looking an awful lot better, and hopefully it'll be good for another 60 years or so. Anyway, a big thank you to Nick, who owns the guitar that this neck came from, for letting us document the process on Tone Twins TV. If you enjoyed this, and I hope you did, don't forget to subscribe. You get notifications whenever we got a new video out. Anyway, thanks for watching. See you again soon. Dabo.